All right. Good afternoon, everyone. The Baker Fairburn Hockey Show is live here on March 29th, 2025. We're going to talk a little Sabres hockey today, leading up to the Sabres Battle of the Eastern Conference basement with the Philadelphia Flyers. Puck drop at 1 o'clock. Sabres looking to put together a 4-game winning streak. Very exciting times in Sabres land. As you trickle in, thanks everyone for hopping in. If you could hit that like button there on the YouTube video, you can subscribe to this channel on your way in here as we set some things up as well. I am your host, Kris Baker. You can find me on X at Sabres Prospects. As always, the star of this enterprise on the right-hand side here on this screen is Matthew Fairburn, your Sabres writer for The Athletic. You can find all of Matthew's work at theathletic.com/Sabres. You can find the audio version of this podcast on Apple or Spotify. Like it, follow it, leave a 5-star review. It always helps. All right, let's just kind of dive right in. Matthew, you've been busy writing stories, following this team. You know, you've been kind of burning the midnight oil. There's a lot that we can talk about today. It's been a couple weeks, I think, since you and I have been together here on the Baker Fairburn Hockey Show. I think it was St. Patrick's Day was the last time we were together. Does that sound right? I've been kind of busy myself, but I've been following along and what's been going on. I've been following your work, and the Sabres have been busy too, believe it or not, right? They made a couple signings we can get to today, but they've also been producing some content, right? And they had a season ticket holder event this week. And I think maybe that's a proper place to start. I do want to get into some of the things that you produced this week in terms of, a big article that came out that was also featured on the New York Times. But let's start with the season ticket holder event this week. Pretty much my takeaway, I don't know what you have to take away from that, was that kind of two things, right? Kevyn Adams seems pretty safe in his position going into next season. At least that's what we're feeling right now. And that's kind of previously speculated on this show as well, maybe for different reasons. Then Lindy Ruff. Sounds like Lindy Ruff is really committed to getting it right here and coming back as well next season to finish out his contract, and we'll see what happens from there. Thoughts on the event? I don't believe you were there. You probably weren't invited, but just thoughts on the event as a whole. And you align with my high-level takeaways of what was said there to the season ticket holders.
Yeah, when we got together after the trade deadline, we talked about the idea that Kevyn Adams probably isn't making that trade, that high level of a trade, without, some assurance, I guess, from Terry Pegula that his job is safe, right? I think there was some hints in that and in how he spoke and his body language and everything else, the tone in which he spoke afterwards and everything. So we kind of thought that was the case. But these are the questions I think that people care about. The idea of, will Kevyn Adams be back? Will Lindy Ruff be back? Will Lindy's assistants look different? Will there be anybody else in the front office to help Kevyn Adams? I'm not sure there's any pocket of questions that is more pressing for Sabres fans than those. Just, you mentioned the story I wrote this week. So I've been getting a lot of, over the last few weeks, trying to talk to season ticket holders. We had those surveys to just get as much feedback about what matters to people, what's on their mind, and, what they're thinking about as they come to the decision whether or not to renew their season tickets. That's the big thing, is organizationally, what is this going to look like? Before people even dive into the roster, that's what they care about. I'm not going to say that the fact that they put Lindy Ruff and Kevyn Adams out there is in and of itself assurance that both will be back, because this time last year they did have Kevyn Adams and Don Granato do one of these events. And from my understanding, from people that were, at both, that one last year was a little bit more heated, maybe. I will say this, though, what was different about this event is that the Sabres wrote up, a little story on their website with a bunch of quotes and information from the event. I don't remember them doing that last year with Don Granato. So that was different for sure. And between that and then Lindy Ruff got his 600th regular season win with the Sabres this week. So he was sort of in a reflective or even forward thinking mood about what how important it is for him to get this right and fix this. And, he voiced that it was really important. It was interesting. Pierre LeBrun at The Athletic had a coaching carousel, sort of roundup, looking around the league after John Tortorella got fired this week. And naturally, Lindy Ruff is in there because his team's in last place in the Eastern Conference and he has only 1 year left on his contract. But, Pierre's reporting was that Kevin Adams has the say on that and that there's no indication that Kevin Adams wants to get rid of him. The idea that Kevin Adams has the final say on that, I think, is perhaps giving a little bit too much to Kevin Adams. I think we know that Terry Pegula has the real final say, particularly when it comes to something like a coach or even the structure of the front office. But these were definite hints, I think, when you talk about how they're speaking and what they're talking about. This is something we're going to be talking about at exit meetings, right? The tone and the subject matter of their conversations at this point, it would be a bit of a surprise. I feel like if particularly if Kevin Adams weren't back. Lindy Ruff, I think that sort of feels like it might be up to him, right? And at the moment, it sounds like he wants to be back. But these are the big questions. We're sitting here with, a couple weeks left. I think the 17th of April is the final regular season game. And at that point, I think Sabres fans will be pretty locked in. I've gotten the sense that there's a lot of people that are maybe a little bit checked out on the hockey portion here down the stretch. They know that there's a bit of fool's gold in sort of the late season life that they're showing. But people are going to be locked into what this team does and organizationally when determining probably, frankly, how invested they are financially in this team next year.
The exit interviews for the players, I think, are going to be really interesting because I think it was also hinted, or not hinted, I think it was spoken that players that want to be here will be extended and they want to find out who doesn't want to be here. And I think they're going to, we talk about surgery a lot, roster surgery. It seems like there's going to be, I'm curious to see how much surgery there is, right? Because that who wants to be here, it's all about that culture that came up in the embedded that the Sabres also put out, the trade deadline embedded.
Which was released same day? Was that Thursday or Wednesday?
That was the same day as the event. While the event was going on, that premiered, I think, at 7:00 on their YouTube channel. I watched it. It was about 17 minutes long. I don't think there was a ton there, but there was some things there. Let's talk about your takeaways from the embedded, because I think kind of like I'm starting to shift into those exit interviews, putting the players in two piles leading up to, the draft and free agency. And Kevin Adams, I think, is going to have some work to do.
A lot of work. It's why we've talked about since, I don't know, we probably first brought up his job security, maybe October or November, I think, on this show. Just the idea that things weren't going well. What's going to happen year 5? This isn't working. And the big piece of that, when we've had those conversations, is how much work needs to be done to this roster. And it starts, as we noted then, in season with the extensions of Zucker and Greenway and the trade, as it turned out, of Dylan Cousins. Obviously a core piece, or previously thought of as core piece, that they moved on from. So now you look ahead to the offseason and you see JJ Peterka, Bowen Byram, Ryan McLeod, who suddenly looks like a really valuable piece, Jack Quinn, Devin Levi, all restricted free agents. Unrestricted free agents, they're pretty much good at this point. James Reimer is the only one left because they locked up Jacob Bryson. Got that done early. What the rush was there, I don't know. Maybe we'll get into that a little bit later. But all of those restricted free agents, those are big decisions. And when you talk about exit meetings and who wants to be here and how invested guys are, who wants short-term deals, who maybe, is getting a little sick of losing, that stuff starts to get revealed at the end of the season. But those are going to be big decisions, like roster altering potentially moves if you're trying to change the mix, which you kind of have to, right? In some way, shape, or form. You can't just trade Dylan Cousins and call the work done. And we've got Alex Tuck eligible to sign a contract extension on July 1st. So that right there is a big big chunk of the team that Kevin Adams has assembled. And I guess my takeaways from the embedded, in combination with the season ticket event and, you know, some of these insights that we saw, culture is something that Lindy Ruff brought up over and over on the embedded. He just kept harping on it. And in talking about needing to change the culture, which is interesting in the context of the Cousins trade, don't you think? Because Cousins, I don't think, or I never got the sense, was necessarily a culture problem. And I don't know if that's what's being implied there. I don't think that's what's being implied.
I
But
didn't feel that. No,
but
not
it's
that it was
possible
implied.
that the culture change that Lindy Ruff is talking about is just that accountability that they referenced so often, this time last year, basically, that when things aren't going well, things will change and they will try to, and it might just be as simple as on ice play, right? The on ice responsibility of a Josh Norris, the intelligence and the commitment to the 200-foot game, and the maturity, right? Just having a guy that's a little bit older. They were obviously very intent on getting Jason Zucker back and having a guy that cared about being in Buffalo and wanted to be one of those leaders. But the culture piece from Lindy Ruff, and I think conditioning was brought up a fair amount in the either the season, I think it was the season ticket holder event, that they brought up conditioning a few times, something they'll be harping on with the players, which is a little bit, there's been a few of these moments this year where you're thinking, really? Like, this is the result of having a really young team. When you're in March and you're Lindy Ruff and you're talking about, guys needing to learn what it means to be a teammate. And then you're in late March talking about conditioning with some of these guys. Incredibly disappointing that some of these basic foundational things have just been a miss with this team.
Culture could also mean, you talk about accountability, could also mean, how do you create that culture? You create it with more experience. And there's two names. You already mentioned Alex Tuck. I think he becomes a pivotal part of this offseason. We're going to be talking about him a lot. Tuck, I think, brings the experience that you want. I think he contributes positively to the culture. There's another name that I think we'll be talking about. We don't have to dive in too deep today, but it kind of makes you wonder about a player like JJ Peterka. And how does he contribute to the culture? Being a younger guy, a very high performer, but also a pretty big needle mover in the trade market, perhaps. And if you want to improve your culture, that's a good piece, right? Something to think about. His exit interview is going to be incredibly pivotal to how they move forward this offseason. Kind of makes you wonder, right? We don't need to go too deep, I think, on Peterka. I think we're going to have a lot of time there, but that's just where my head's at. Thinking about culture, the big buzzword, Lindy. I don't have insights into Lindy's relationship with JJ Peterka, for example. I think that he is well liked in the organization, the player, but yeah, kind of more to come, right? I think that's something that we're going to talk about a lot. My other takeaways, just real quick, I just wrote a couple down. Terry Pegula's involvement. Let's go there real quick. I don't think it's out of the ordinary for the owner to be briefed. You kind of get all the stakeholders in the organization together. You kind of carve out, here's our strategy for trade deadline day. You do that very early. He's involved in that. He's going to share his thoughts, right? But there was more to it, maybe, from how Kevin interacted with Terry throughout the day. Fair to say?
Yeah, there was a lot of communication there, right? A lot of let me check with Terry. Let me go double check and call Terry. He was on speakerphone with the Zucker thing, and with Norris, they're explaining what they're getting. Look, you go back to when Jason Botterill was fired and Kevin Adams was hired, and Terry Pegula wanted to be heard. He wanted to be communicated with. This is what that looks like. Now, I think, to your point, it's not totally unusual to be briefing the owner on these sorts of things as you're going about your business. It doesn't, I always think about when these things come out, they're going through layers of, you know, checks and balances of what they want out there, right? And there's obviously a perception that Terry Pagula is too involved in the day to day and in the hockey portion, maybe that he has his thumb on the scale a little bit. I don't get the sense that he's Jerry Jones, right? That he really is like feeling super strongly about Josh Norris versus Dylan Cousins. And I don't think this provided that. But I think when the fan base has that perception, I just found it interesting that those bits and pieces were included because it doesn't do much to quiet that notion, right? It's like you said, and like I'm saying, it's not totally out of the ordinary. They didn't, show Terry Pagula like banging the table for a certain player or anything like that. It's just, it didn't really quiet that idea and probably didn't set a lot of people at ease, when they heard his voice or heard Kevin, talking about, let's check with Terry, let's check with the docs, right? So the doctors are an
I
interesting
wrote that
piece of this
down.
too.
Les Passan had a lot of accountability put on him for the Josh Norris thing. We'll get to Norris in a minute, but I did write that down. Yeah, go ahead.
Considering just the timing of when this was released, right? If this was released the Monday after the trade deadline, I think it would be different. But the fact that that is a bit of a storyline right now, right? Josh Norris has been out now, over 2 weeks? And there's been a little bit of mystery, I guess, about the injury. And there's been question about, do they have damaged goods here? Like these are all things people are wondering about. And there's just a right out in the open, like the team doc is
100%, no reservations,
right.
all in. Like,
Now, I will
okay.
say,
No, and
I
that's not
think
a bad thing. It's just
no, I mean, and it's not, and it goes. I think it's worth pointing out the process here because we had a question from Kevin saying if Norris has a pre-existing injury that Ottawa did not disclose, do the Sabres have a grievance? That I don't know that you can have a grievance there. I think you got to do your own homework, but I don't think this is something that wasn't disclosed. It's been described as a mid-body injury by Lindy Ruff, and right before the Four Nations break, Josh Norris got a mid-body injury, was out a couple of weeks for the Senators. He took a cross-check to the lower back in a game against the Wild in the third period. He missed a few weeks, came back, and then, so when he talks about this is something he's been dealing with, something he had, something that was aggravated in the accumulation of games, it's pretty easy to draw the line to that injury, which is encouraging because it's not the shoulder. And if it is a back or a rib or something like that, something that was a back injury that was from a cross check or a rib injury that was from a cross check, like you're not talking about a chronic issue, right? It's not something that's going to stop you from making a trade necessarily. So I think perhaps there's been a bit too much fear over that situation, but it is fair to point out that this is a player that struggled to stay healthy. I think that was a risk they knew they were taking. And this particular situation doesn't raise additional concern for me. I don't think this is Kevin Adams being negligent. I think it's easy for people to look for reasons to poke holes in Kevin Adams right now. That's what people want to do, and I understand it. I guess I would just say there's plenty of other things to point to other than this. Now, if you are saying the injury risk was too much anyways, that's a different argument and a fair argument. But this particular injury does seem like something that was pretty out in the open, and I assume they knew about it.
Yeah, the Norris thing's kind of interesting too. Well, I'm going to go back to that in a minute. Let's just put a bow on embedded. The other thing besides the team doctor, which we talked about, what did you think of Kevin Adams congratulating Steve Staios? And
I was
we heard that a couple times. Like,
yeah,
congratulations, man, congratulations. Like, I don't know if that's I don't think that's NHL trade etiquette.
I don't know. Yeah, I'd be interested to maybe watch more of these and see if that's the common common way that GMs go about it. I'm like, I was trying to kind of piece that together in my head, like what other similar situation would you be congratulating someone for? I mean, you just made it like, I think that's more of like a, hey, I appreciate you, and how you handled this. Thanks for the constructive back and forth, hope we can do some business together. Good luck the rest of the season. All those things make sense to me, but congrats. I don't know what congrats on getting on getting one of my great players, I guess. I
Yeah,
don't know.
right.
It's like
Yeah.
I couldn't quite figure that one out, but congrats, I guess. I mean, sure. I don't know. Like,
Just found it odd. It was kind of funny. So, like, just, offline, Matthew and I have been regularly congratulating each other when we're talking or texting, and it's kind of like our JBD thing. It's just like, it's just kind of funny, I guess. Something to keep us going here in this tough stretch, the final mile of the season. The Norris injury, what's been kind of interesting about this is, they could be just kind of not pushing it. They don't have to right now. It's the end of the season. They're not going to make the playoffs. While mathematically still eligible to claw their way in, it's very unlikely. And it has created opportunity for like Yuri Kulik, for Zach Benson to kind of move up the lineup. And we talked about Kulik a while ago here, where you can just see elements of his game that are very promising, kind of not anointing. We hate anointing anyone, but he does have star potential. And you even referenced that this week in your last, I think it was on Friday morning, yesterday.
yeah.
And what have you thought of this? So my big thing, like when you look at the numbers, Kulik with Thompson's kind of interesting, but like Kulik and Benson together, there's some really nice like expected goal results that come from them and their share of, shots and things like that. Those numbers match the eye test. I think that it's really encouraging. And I go back and I say, okay, they're really taking the opportunity that's been created for them, with them kind of taking their time with Norris and not pushing Norris, right?
Yeah, you bring up the numbers when Benson and Kulik are together. I had been looking at, writing about Benson being on the top line and thinking, I wonder if Benson with Thompson, like what the difference is. And it was pretty negligible, as far as the expected goal share and things like that. And then I added Kulik in and looked at Benson and Kulik, and I was like, oh, wow, that's like a huge jump. And they've played together with some different combinations. They've got a decent enough sample size. And I think that is a good place to look, because when the tricky part about the end of the season, when the pressure's off and guys are in elevated roles, and maybe even there's some teams overlooking the Sabres, or there's a variety of factors that help guys, like that Penguins team the other night was just checked out, right? And the Sabres steamrolled them, and they got terrible goaltending. But you don't want to, I think the mistake the Sabres have made in the past is one they need to guard against here, which is Kulik and Benson look great. We've got our top six guys, right? These are the guys that are going to fix our top six, because we've seen the over reliance on youth come back to hurt them a little bit. It raises a really interesting question for me about what the top six looks like next season, because as I sit here right now, Norris and Kulik seem like your most likely 1-2 centers. And is that good enough? I think is the question.
I was just going to ask you that. Like, is it good enough? Yeah, I'm glad you posed that, because I don't know, right?
And if it's not, well, then what? Because Ryan McLeod's your number 3 center and is pretty much perfect for the role, given what he does defensively and how he's fit in with some of the players that play in that group. So do you need it? If you go and get another center, where does that put Kulik? Is he on the wing, or do you focus the attention more on the wingers in the top six and feel like, you roll the dice with a combination of Norris, Kulik, and you could even say Thompson, right? Because depending on who he's playing with, maybe he, mixes in on faceoffs, or the responsibility switches mid-shift, whatever,
Yeah,
you have out there. It's interesting, because in my head, I'm thinking Kulik looks ready to be a top 6 player. He's looked really good, and that's at various points of the season, not just right now. But I'm also wondering, between Norris's injury history and Kulik's relative inexperience, is that good enough? I think the answer is probably not.
No, it's not actually, the more that you think about it, and that's the one thing that I was thinking about this morning was you do need to give yourself, another guy that can effectively play the middle in your top 6, a creator. But if Cooley, here's the caveat is it's Cooley, so he makes sense to me as a centerman. His speed, he's much better in all 3 zones of the ice. He's smart, makes really good plays with the puck. Positionally, he's been really good. It's about the consistency. If he can dial in his consistency, then that it changes maybe the center that you need, because I think that because kind of the point, like Kulik can play with Thompson. He can be your number 1 guy at even strength. I believe it. I want to see a little bit more of like, some tougher matchups. I want to see him out there against Toronto and things like that. But overall, I do think that, especially again, when you look at like what happens with Tuck, what happens with Peterka, things of that nature, I think that you are still in the market for another centerman. Just give yourself more flexibility. Any guy can go up and down the wing, but get yourselves a guy that can be really strong, top 6 centerman when you need it to guard against the Norris unknown. That's just kind of where I'm at right now going into the off season. But the bottom line is like, I'm still looking for, go back to culture. Big guys, like we saw the Sabres go out and sign a 6'4", 205, 210-pound kid out of Brown this week who can move pretty well. That's Tyler Kopp. But they need more of that just overall. Some names that I keep looking at. I don't want to, totally spoil it, but I've been talking to you a lot in text about like Will Cooley from the Rangers, right? Big power forward guy, hits, can score, guy like that. I'm looking just for that attitude. And it's almost like, I don't care where they play in the lineup, just more of it. So the Kulik thing, though, I think has been really encouraging for Sabres fans to latch on to as the season runs out, but Benson too. Benson's determination, he's got more to do. He's got more to get stronger, improve the shot, maybe get some of that separation speed that he's going to need. But as he continues to get stronger, he's already got those stumpy legs. As he continues to get stronger, he'll get that stronger skating. But the mentality is right where it needs to be. And this is a guy that I don't think is just rattled about, you could talk about, was he up too early? Did he miss an opportunity to play for Team Canada at the World Juniors and things like that? I don't think it matters to him. And I think that he's had the right mindset the whole time, where I'm not worried about him being up too soon and being quote unquote ruined, because you'll hear that a lot from the fans. I don't worry about it with him. You feeling the same with Benson? Because I see it on the ice.
Well, I remember having a conversation with him around mid-season about, the confidence of scoring goals, right? The idea that you're up at the NHL level and you're not scoring the way you're used to, and it was almost as if the concept hadn't applied to him. Like, he's like, I'm no less confident. And he's like, it's not, the opportunities need to, come, but I never got the sense that confidence was an issue for him at any point. I mean, you can just read body language. There's very few guys as energized and upbeat as he is on a day-to-day basis. And it's striking in comparison to somebody like Jack Quinn, who you can just see different body language from. And Quinn, missing that meeting in Minnesota and missing that game, it's like just one more thing on, to add to the pile of a really disappointing season. That's a guy that seems like his confidence has been rattled by, and his mental focus has been thrown off kilter by everything that's happened this season. Benson, almost the opposite. Lindy Ruff pointed out that he thought there was a time recently where his energy dipped, Benson's, that is. But he said it's back to where it needs to be. And he said it's kind of funny that it's back now because they've had this crazy stretch of games, right? Like 4 and 6 nights, and, they're playing all the time. And he's like, and his energy is better than it was a couple of weeks ago. So I think if anything, when you're talking about him being up too early, those are the things that you're worried about, like his ability to last 82 games and sustain consistently because of how much energy physically and emotionally that he plays with. And the strength piece too. But the fact of the matter is, in the WHL, he would not have been putting on a tremendous amount of muscle. I'm always amazed by what those guys go through in the WHL in terms of how many games they play, the fact that they're
Mhm.
bussing all over the place, the nutrition isn't nearly as good as it is in the NHL. Like, he would not have been putting on nearly, and now he would have been confident. He would have been piling up points. He would have got to play for Team Canada. He would have got to do all these things. But I think the Benson conversation is pretty similar to the Kulich conversation in that you can see a role for him in the top six. You can see the different skill set that he brings, his ability to make plays down low, his short area quickness, his hockey IQ, his playmaking ability to win puck battles and get the puck back on the forecheck. It's just different than what they have in a lot of their other players in the top six. I think the problem is similar to Kulich, where you say, can you bank on that? Like, isn't this the problem they've had in the past where you're banking on the young guy to make another jump instead of the possibility that he does hit a little bit of a lull or a rough patch in his development? And can you afford that? Is the rest of your top six good enough? And I don't think it is. So then you know, if anything, Benson his potential has been dampened a little bit the last couple of years because he's ended up in the bottom six a lot and he's good at it, right? Like his defensive ability fits in that role, but you don't want to cap him at that because I do think he will be a legitimate point producer in the NHL. It's just same with Kulich. Like, can you bank on these young guys? I mean, Kulich turns 21 in the middle of April, and
Mhm.
Benson turns 20 in the middle of May. And so, when we talk about the youth of the team, the average age is one thing, but the average age of guys playing super important roles is the other thing. So, if you're going to do that, you need to insulate that top six with some other guys.
Yeah, so I guess with Benson, it's like playing down the lineup and playing that role for a little bit this season actually makes him more effective when he's up. That's why it's encouraging. They're going to get this little runway to finish out the year playing in a very elevated role, but you can't bank on it. If you're Kevin Adams, you have to learn from your mistakes in the past of banking on. And by the way, so go shopping, push those guys down the lineup, get Norris healthy, have him come back and see if he can, stay in the lineup all year and things start to come together. They're going to get good. This is good experience for Benson right now. My point about the playing in the bottom and just kind of embracing that role and making you more effective when you do move up. They tried it with Krebs, but maybe it hasn't come all the way through with Krebs. Although Krebs has made some strides this year. Actually, when you look at some of those expected goal share numbers too, he's right there, like two of the top. And again, very minimal time, like combinations that have been together 55 minutes. Krebs is involved in both of them. So again, I think it's partly that role, managing the puck, all these buzzwords that we always hear, Lindy. I just find it really encouraging to see these young guys doing well while they have this time at the end of the season. And if they become third liners next year, great. They have the experience of playing up. They'll be better for the matchups. And it allows you to your point, go out, insulate those guys. You're investing in them by investing in the team and getting some better players that can protect them in the lineup. So,
And they
I kind
will
of like,
get
yeah,
they will get top six opportunities regardless because guys get hurt.
guys
And
get hurt.
that's a better way to get those opportunities in doses, right? In chunks. Like right now, what Benson is getting is great. Doesn't mean you need to pencil them in and lock it in, but you like those guys getting a taste of that role and what it takes. And I do think they would both make, you want your third line to be able to match up defensively. And I think both of those guys have the chops. But you also want your third line to have some pop, right? You don't want it to be just a checking line, just a defensive, Okposo Gergensons type of crew. You want your third line to have some scoring potential. So, the idea of those guys further down the lineup really isn't a problem. I mean, maybe in an ideal world, you have another center. So Josh Norris isn't your number one. You have, insert high-priced acquisition as your top center. Josh Norris is number two. And then maybe Kulich 3 and McLeod 4. I mean, McLeod is a really good defensive player. He's not a checker, but he could bring something to even a fourth line. And on a really good team, I know he's shown potential this year, right? Like he might end up with, he's got career highs basically across the board. And
what's he going to get paid?
Yeah, I mean, it's looking like, if I had to guess, I think AFP Analytics had him in the 3.3, 3.5 range maybe, but it looks like 4 to 4.5 to me, based on how he's playing. And they just have a lot to figure out in terms of the puzzle of how this fits together. Like, it is not, the idea of bringing back Kevin Adams and Lindy Ruff and continuity and all that. That's, probably not what I would do if this were, the hockey team, if I owned it and I was running it. But just from a roster standpoint, like, you need to make changes and you need to decide what some of these guys are. There's a lot of evaluation that needs to happen. And we haven't even really talked about the blue line, which has been a conversation, I feel like, going back to last July, where we were just saying, how does this fit? How does this work when you have 4 lefties and 3 of them are offensive minded puck movers? And this year, the other lefty, Matthias Samuelsson, is not a defensive shutdown physical guy and not a puck mover. And he makes over $4 million a year. And then they signed Jacob Bryson. So, not to totally pivot the conversation to the blue line, but all these questions they have to answer at forward, there's just as many to answer, on the back end, and how that all fits together goes back to what we've said about there's collecting talent and then there's assembling a team. And I think Lindy Ruff's presence and maybe all this culture talk is part of that. I think it's either he or Kevin Adams spoke about, I think it was Lindy Ruff, spoke about getting guys into roles that they're embracing and excited about, and clearly defining those roles. That's what needs to happen. And there's going to need to be some personnel changes to fill out some certain roles and to make this more of a well-built, well-thought-out team, instead of just a collection of talented, young assets.
We're about 40 minutes in. If you could please hit the like button if you haven't already. We're going to go right up to probably anthems for today's game. Matthew, I want to give some time to talk about your story that you had this week on season ticket renewals and some of the factors that the Sabres are kind of facing in trying to build up their season ticket base. But you mentioned the defense. Let's just spend a couple minutes on what you've seen, because I think that we've seen this player have a couple good games now since coming to Buffalo, and that's Jacob Bernard Docker, JBD, or as I like, Yoki Bernard Docker, right-handed guy. Because you mentioned the lefties. Let's talk about Yoki Bernard Docker here for a couple seconds, because he seems to be a pretty hungry player, embracing his new start here with the Buffalo Sabres.
Yeah, quick note. I just checked. Rasmus Dahlin is going to miss today's game with an illness. So
wonderful.
That'll be old news when, if people are downloading the audio tonight or something. But those of you watching live, getting ready for this game, Dahlin out with an illness, which, gives some added opportunity to Byram and Power. Jacob Bernard Docker, JBD, has had himself a little bit of a nice early impression here. He's I think four games in now. Is that right? Into his Sabres career. He had a quiet debut against Minnesota. He had 2 assists and was also out there for 2 goals against the Jets. One really nice assist. One was pretty simple play. Got it down to JJ Peterka, and Peterka had a good individual effort. But the other one was a nice setup. And then he scored against his old team, Ottawa, on Tuesday. Decent shot, beat the goalie. And then Thursday laid a huge hit on Connor Dewar, who sort of forced him to drop the gloves basically afterwards. And we were joking like Bernard Docker seems pretty inexperienced in the fighting realm, because it was like he still had his gloves on. He's like,
Dewar was telling him, he's like, you got to take your gloves off, dude. Like you're grabbing my collar, but you got to take the glove off. And he takes one off, and then Dewar's like, okay, now take the other one off so I can punch you.
Right, now I'm going to punch you. Dewar definitely got the best of him in that one, but the hit was great. And even after he had the goal on Tuesday, he was like, this is fine. The points are cool, but that's not my game. I want to be hard to play against. I want to, play a hard-nosed game, which wasn't necessarily the scouting report on this guy, but he's had a lot of, he's had some time injured. He's had time out of the lineup, had time to reflect. Brand new opportunity where people don't really, I mean, even Lindy Ruff has said, I don't really know much about this guy, right? So, chance to just have a clean slate and be the type of player you want to be at 24 years old, first round pick, once upon a time. I like the fact that there's somebody hungry, somebody battling in front of the net, somebody blocking shots and laying body checks. Like, he wants to take somebody's job. Now, again, we're not going to take 4 games in March and say, all right, never mind. They've got Owen Power's partner. No need to go shopping. But a nice depth piece. And every time he plays well, I just keep thinking, why were they in a rush to sign Jacob Bryson? Like,
Now that part, that's puzzling because you also have Ryan Johnson playing very well down in Rochester, 24 years old. He's not going to really hurt you in terms of, lowering your average age. If he were to come up next year and play at the end of the day, I think it's clear though, like you can make this comment, like you're not overanalyzing the end of the season run. They added some quality depth. They're going to create competition. He was more than just a throw in the trade, former first round pick, right? Like, so you have a player here to, they needed a right shot. I'm encouraged. I think it's all about that change of scenery, because we're at some point we want to talk about the Dylan Cousins change of scenery. We saw him come back, but not today, because I think we're going to run out of time with all the shit that we want to talk about today. But I just wanted to get your thoughts on that. You've spoken to him?
yeah, he's
Attitude's good, right?
He seems, like you said, the opportunity is the big thing for him. Like, he feels like he has a lot to prove. And those are the types of players that you want to bring in. I think we talked about this last summer where you have a roster full of high draft picks, first round picks, a lot of guys that have been handed things, handed opportunity. Don't want to block these guys. Got to give them their opportunity to get their minutes, to get their power play time, to get their top 6 time. How about some guys that have had to scratch and claw and earn it, right? Like, how about some guys that are playing for their careers, that are a little bit desperate? And maybe that starts to trickle throughout the locker room of, like,
How about a coach that's going to coach for his coaching career?
well, that too, right?
Right?
I think
Yeah.
it goes throughout the organization.
Yeah.
Start at the top, somebody who's worked their way up the ranks and, built a resume and earned a general manager job. I think that is where culture begins, I think.
Mhm.
And that's in the locker room. Guys start to take notice of that when you have even a Zucker type, right? That was essentially playing for, every year he's playing for his career. Because when you're that age, any year could kind of be the last one where if you're not good enough, teams will shrug their shoulders and, they may sign you, but certainly in terms of dollars, Zucker's trying to squeeze every dollar he can out of the end of his career, and he's playing like it. So you want that attitude out of as many guys as possible. I mean, of course, you're going to have some really high picks and you're going to have some guys, but I'd say the guy, number 1 overall pick is the guy that has that attitude the most, in Rasmus Dahlin. I mean, that guy feels like he's trying to prove himself every single time he's on the ice. So that's what you're screening for, I think, when you talk about, they were talking on the Embedded about character and, Seth Appert knew Josh Norris and, the character's good, all this. When you're going through the draft process, when you're talking about free agents, like, get some of these guys that their hair's on fire and they're, the Ryan Lombergs, the just guys that leave it all out there because that's the only way they survive.
Yeah.
Is Bernard Docker that extreme about it? Maybe not, but he's got enough of that in him, I think, that, now he's got to carry it over, right? The adrenaline of the new opportunity in the first few games. We saw it with Cousins. It's about sustaining it and going into the off season and building on it and coming, all this talk about conditioning, like, damn, these guys better come ready. And September, I don't know what the hell this conditioning thing's about, because I feel like we were talking about that last year with accountability, right? Guys not showing up ready to go. Like, holy smokes, it's the NHL. Like, conditioning should be the bare minimum that you can achieve.
Yeah, so for Bernard Decker, I think that my thoughts are the same as kind of the day they made the deal. They got some adequate, competent depth. Let's see what he does here. They're kind of giving them a buffer to maybe it's evidence that they have learned from their mistakes. Now they can maybe block guys and suppress, your Komarovs, your Max Sturbach when he enters the system and let them have room to breathe at the AHL level. Novikov, as he keeps emerging, he's not there yet, but he's a guy that'll crack even though he's a lefty. He'll get minutes at some point next year and plug some holes for injuries and things like that. But maybe it's evidence of that. So, but encouraging, right? Just some housekeeping real quick, since I mentioned the player's name, and then I do want to get to your story. Let's just kind of dive into it. We saw the Sabres sign goaltender Topias Laininen to an entry level that'll begin next year. Got his, we'll see what happens with him because there's going to be a domino that what happens with Devin Levi in the AHL next year. Scott Ratzlaff is also entering the system on his entry-level contract next year. Are Laininen and Ratzlaff going to kind of shuttle back and forth between Jacksonville and the coast and Rochester? Or would Topias Laininen maybe even be loaned if he can find a good situation back in Europe? I think it's got to be First Division, Liga, or SHL. We'll see. I think everything should be on the table. They have time. They could loan him. Wherever he's going to get the most minutes, be able to play, it's probably best. But it all starts with what do they do with Devin Levi, right? Next season, we'll get into that. Max Sturbach, Michigan State, 20 minutes a game this season as a sophomore. I think that I was telling you offline, college, if I was his advisor, I'd say, look, Max, college, best years of your life. Don't be in a hurry. Go back, be a leader, win a national championship with the Spartans before you enter. Like, it's something to think about. If he really wants to turn pro, bring him in. Otherwise, let him be. Viljami Mariala, we'll see. Sabres haven't told June 1st. His season ended. Made some incredible strides this year. He's a big playmaker. I think they could use him to have some playmaking center depth in Rochester next year. We'll see where that one goes. And then Jake Richard still playing. UConn plays again tomorrow at the NCAAs. He's the interesting one. I think that he could benefit from going back, kind of the same talk track, especially if Joey Muldowney, his roommate at UConn, returns for next season. Stay together, keep pushing UConn up the charts in Hockey East and play a big role there. He's the one, though. Remember, he was drafted, did the gap year in the USHL. He's now 2 years into his collegiate career. If he goes back next year, I don't want to put the fire alarm up because he would have that ability to say, I'm no longer a bona fide student after next season and go to free agency because that would be his fourth post-draft year. The one thing I would say is you mitigate all this risk with a Sturbach, with a Jake Richard, with all these guys by having great communication, being on the same page with the player. Don't operate in fear of a free agent, a guy becoming a free agent. Do what's best for the player in your organization and things will take care of themselves. We have about 15 minutes left. Any thoughts on that real quick for 30 seconds before we go into your story that appeared on the New York Times this week?
Richard has been a real nice surprise this year. I mean, I've always liked the shot, liked the player. To see it come together a bit for him at UConn is pretty cool. And I would agree that he could play in the AHL next year, but I think he's better off continuing to, refine his game a little bit and being more than just a scorer and being in those, that big role with a lot of pressure to follow it up. Sturbach, it seems, we'll see. I guess this is kind of where the weekend you're watching, right? The next few days to see, where he goes. But that's a team that should have enough pieces back to make another run. And he's still pretty young. They have room for him if they want to bring him in, but seems like school's really important to him from the conversations I've had with him. I think it makes sense to, especially considering you have 2 years really of decision-making time with him. You're not living in fear really at all just yet. So interesting time for a few of those guys. It was a tough one for Brody Zemer too in the Gophers early exit for them. They had a tough
2.5 weeks, 2.5 weeks between games, but he had a great season. Cemented himself as a top line player at the NCAA level. Played with Oliver Moore, Jimmy Snuggerud quite a bit. Oliver Moore looks like he's going to leave and join Chicago. Snuggerud be in St. Louis before you know it. But yeah, lots to talk about there on the prospect side, and we'll keep doing that here. heading into the offseason. It's a lot of action right now in the prospect ranks of playoffs going on. Okay, let's talk a little bit. Should we do it now? We should do it now, right? Let's just get it started. So, Matthew, you put a lot of work into writing a story about the kind of the conundrum that the Sabres have with their season ticket renewal process. On a previous episode, Baker Fairburn Hockey Show, we talked a little bit about the Pete Goelli memo that went out to season ticket holders and maybe some missed opportunity in some of the language that was in that letter. But you caught up with some season ticket holders. You kind of laid out a lot of the forces, market forces, headwinds that the Sabres have in trying to build up their season ticket base. I thought, just my thoughts, I thought it was another example of you continuing to emerge as the best Sabres writer that we have in this market. I think it was fact-based. I think it was fair. I think you were fair to the Sabres when maybe some journalists wouldn't have been as fair, but I think you laid it out really well. What do you want to share about what do you want to share about your process, or maybe behind the scenes, like the work that you had to do leading up to that article, maybe some of the feedback that you've gotten since then? And by the way, for the folks that are in the chat and for anyone listening, once this is, out there on audio, go and read the article. 300 plus comments on an Athletic article. Pretty good. So nice job, Matthew. Let's hear your thoughts on your process.
I appreciate it. And I know it's a topic that maybe doesn't seem novel, right, to people that are every day. Like the idea that the Sabres attendance has been struggling is not new, but it popped into my head early in the season, and to an extent last season when they had that really good year, but still early in the season, they struggled a little bit with attendance. And I don't blame Sabres fans for this at all. They want to see, they need to see some legitimate winning hockey to be sold, that they're going to come back and flood this arena. And they will. They absolutely will. We've seen it at various points throughout the last couple of years when there's been reason to get excited about the Sabres. People want reason to be excited. But attendance early this year was tough, and they had Lindy Ruff to sell. Literally, he was helping them sell season tickets. He was calling people. He was, he was actively involved. He was part of the marketing in terms of $22 per game tickets and Lindy Ruff bobbleheads. And the question I keep asking myself now is, what do you have to sell? And how long can you realistically do what nobody has ever done in this league? Go 14 years without the playoffs. How long can that go before you completely wear people out? You have an NFL team in town that has everybody's attention, seemingly 365, a legitimate Super Bowl contender year after year with arguably the best quarterback on planet Earth. You have, a situation at the Canadian border, in terms of tariffs and everything else, where 7 to 10% of your season ticket base now has the question of do I want to spend my money in America? Do I want to support an American company? Or simply the Canadian dollar being negatively impacted might make these people make financial decisions, or the border slowing down might make it more of a headache. I think sports will fall into a little bit of a gray area there, but even 7 to 10% of your ticket base is a lot to have hanging in the balance when you already have a lot of people, and people I spoke to, feedback we got on surveys, and comments people wrote in on those surveys. A lot of people are fed up, and we're talking about not people that have had tickets for 5 years, 7 years. Talk to somebody that's been going to games for 30 years. People that have deep emotional connections to this team that are just going to leave the seats empty now. And I think there's a lot of this is what's happening on the ice. The team sucks, and at some point you have to make a financial decision as a consumer to say what, this is not worth it for me to, invest myself in this team. But there is also, I think, some business aspects that they've missed the mark on, in terms of transparency, in terms of, accountability was brought up. One of the season ticket holders I spoke to was just complaining about the organization being tone deaf. And Pete Goelli's letter was definitely part of that. I think that, if anything, angered more people than it sold. The idea that they were making massive improvements on the penalty kill, that they were right on the doorstep of where they needed to be, that Terry Pegula's name isn't even on that letter, that he hasn't taken questions about this team in 5 years, that, little things that they get wrong business wise, the lettering on jerseys, you know, the small stuff becomes big stuff when you don't win. And NHL Deputy Commissioner Bill Daley did say there's no concern about Buffalo, which I think was a relevant question to ask, just in the sense that they are the smallest American market in the NHL. They are the second smallest market in the league, ahead of only Winnipeg. And when they were sounding the alarm bells on Winnipeg last season, it was like, man, that is a hockey crazy market. But Winnipeg is not dramatically different than Buffalo, right? In terms of just your corporate dollars and the size of your market. Like, you need to give people a reason. There's enough people here to support this team, and it's a great market. You need to, but you can't miss the playoffs for 14 straight years. You can't, how much longer can that go on? Now, they're talking about expansion in the NHL, which I think is a good thing for the Sabres, because that means they're not looking to pull in Arizona with anybody anytime soon. But I don't know. The importance of the article to me was to give a little bit of a voice to these people that are struggling through these decisions, that have been supporting this team and don't always feel heard. And so it was pretty rewarding to put all that together. And I appreciate you saying it was fair, because it was not necessarily my intent to skewer the organization. It was to lay out the facts, and a lot of the facts do that themselves, right? Like, it was not a column. It was a collection of facts that don't paint the best picture, but it's something I think, especially the timing of it right now, to me, is like, let's underscore why they need to be urgent from a hockey standpoint, because it's going to continue to erode the business. And, being under, 10, how many tickets are they going to lose, right? They've been hovering, like, give or take, around the 10,000 mark, based on, reading the tea leaves of preseason attendance and things like that. Like, that's not good enough. And so, and it's not, our Penguins writer was in town the other day, and we were talking, and he's like, man, this is such a good hockey town. Like, this is such a shame to see the empty seats and to see just not a lot of life in the building. And I'm like, you're telling me, because, like, the moments that you do see it, it's great. And, obviously this fan base deserves a lot better. And that was sort of the intent of what I wrote and put together.
So you've done some out of town media requests, right? Since the article was published, I think you were on in Vancouver, right? Maybe some others. What's the feedback from out of the market? Because I think that's a big part of, like, this article, right? Like, it's not necessarily just for your regular readers for the Sabres athletic site. It was more of a bigger picture. Here's what's going on in this market. I think that's why I caught the eye of the New York Times from a business perspective, right? But, like, what are you hearing from outside, or questions, or, it's probably the same thing as, like, your Penguins writer, right? Like, I think everyone realizes, like, man, this is a proud and a very good, robust hockey market. It's a damn shame. Is there more to it than that you're hearing from outside of this market?
There's a lot of sympathetic people to what Buffalo fans are going through. And there's a lot of people that, the question that gets brought up a lot is about Terry Pegula. And it's one of the things I noted in that story. They are the only team in the NHL that has left at least $6 million in cap space unspent in each of the last 5 seasons. Like, what do you expect in a flat cap world? What do you think the outcome is going to be when you're leaving $6 million? And that $6 million is the low point. They've had, $15 million unspent, or 10 or 12 some years. Like, and teams go through this, right? Rebuilding teams, you see, hang out there for a couple of years. Anaheim, I think maybe 3 or 4 of those years has been in that bucket. The Arizona franchise between Utah and Arizona has had a few of those years, but even they had 1 year where they did. And look, if you're using Arizona as like, oh, hey, look, Arizona doesn't spend either. It's like, well, yeah, look, they're not Arizona anymore, right? So the competitive piece of this is important, because we spoke about the rising salary cap and the haves and the have-nots. And if your business is hurting, which bucket do you think you're going to fall into? right? Last year when Bill Daly, when I say the alarm bells were sounded in Winnipeg, it was actually by Winnipeg, right? They're one of their high-ranking executives basically
Yeah, they were
saying,
like, we need X, right?
we
Yeah.
need 13.5, in terms of tickets. And if we don't have that, we're going to be in trouble. And Bill Daly sort of put some water on the fire a little bit and was like, but one of the things he mentioned, he said, I wish we had 32 Winnipegs. And what he meant, and he followed it up by saying, this team spends to the cap. They're competitive, X, Y, and Z. The Sabres aren't. They're not good. And they don't spend to the cap. And they don't invest in player salaries the same way. So at least the last 5 years, they did before. That is like a big thing that they need to prove. A lot of people, I think, either want, Louis Gott, one of the season ticket holders I spoke to, they did a lot to sell him last year or a couple years ago when he was thinking about leaving. They bumped his seats up to the 100s for the last 10 games. They took him out to a bar and
Concert tickets.
bought him drinks all night. They got him concert tickets. Like they really went all out for him. And this year, all these people don't blame their ticket reps, by the way. They're like, these people are doing a great job and there's not much more they could do. But he's like almost apologetic when he calls them, and he's like, don't call me anymore unless there's a major organizational change. And I think a lot of people have reached that point. I think a lot of people have reached the point where if they're not spending to the cap, they don't feel like they want to spend their money. And it's a vicious cycle because maybe if the place was full and the team was, flushed with cash, Pagula would be more willing to spend. But I think a lot of people say that the other piece of it needs to come first, right? The billionaire should spend to the cap, and then the average Joe will buy the tickets if the team is good. But it also becomes, you could tie it right into, I think, the players too, because it does, the atmosphere in the building does start to weigh on them, right? There's people chanting for your general manager to be fired. There's people bringing palm trees. I mean, it has been a hell of a year in that arena, which is part of what led me to go down this path. And Pete Goelli did not comment on the story. I know we had some people in the chat when we were bringing up some of this stuff a few weeks ago saying it'd be great to hear from him on this stuff. I agree. I had asked for him a few times dating back to November. I was under the impression that, funny thing is, if he had talked in November, it's probably a different story, right? The accumulation of stuff that happened since then, including the letter, Kevin Adams' press conference, some, the accumulation of data and all the stuff with Canada. It's like, it's become an even more complicated story. But I was under the impression that maybe he would want to participate. It was kind of left open. And, right before publication, he said he wasn't going to. So I think that upset some people, right? I don't know. I think I heard from a few people anyway, Sabres fans, that were disappointed that, he didn't want to speak to the frustration of the fan base or, the state of business now a year into the job. And, he was doing some interviews about the Bills Hallmark movie this week, and he'll be down at the NFL owners meetings next week. So this perception that perhaps there's more of an investment in the Bills in terms of, money or also time. And, I think that doesn't help that, I guess. I'm not a COO, so you can comment or not comment on whatever he wants to comment on. That's fine. But I wanted to point that out for people that were wondering, because I know people in the chat had mentioned, it'd be good to hear from him on this stuff.
Yeah, the fact that he declined comment was a very powerful single line in that story. Frankly, for me, I just think there's a responsibility to comment there. Hopefully he corrects that with you at some point in the very near future, because they got a lot of work to do. Just like, Kevin and Lindy have a lot of work to do. I think Pete Guelli's got a lot of work to do on the business side there with the tickets for the Buffalo Sabres, not the Bills.
Right. They'll have more, as time goes on, they're going to have more and more of a picture, right? I think what happened was the deadline on March 17th, right? Your price goes up if you don't renew by this deadline. They were calling people after that and offering sort of a soft extension of the deadline. They're going to have a picture going into the summer of what this looks like as far as renewals, what that means for the bottom line. And look, Goelli is not a complete unicorn being COO of 2 teams. There's a few other places that have this, but NFL is big business, right? That is a big undertaking, and there's a lot on his plate with the new stadium and different things going on with the NFL all the time, and they're in the spotlight, right? That is a big time team, that is a national presence. And so does the attention get pulled away from the Sabres? Probably. And he doesn't have much of a background in hockey at all, really. He came from the New York Giants and the Hornets before that, and he's from the area, so it's not like he doesn't know what hockey is, but his experience, I think it's just 2 dramatically different jobs, right? And I think it's hard to wrap your head around the divide between the team and the fan base until you're right up close to it and in it, and to see the damage that's been done going back, years. And we'll have, longer discussions, I'm sure, in the summer and off-season episodes about, there was some reference to the tank in there, right? That they sold out 11 games at the end of that tank season before Eichel. 11 straight games to finish the season. They have 4 sellouts this year. Like, it's amazing. And they're still drawing great ratings on the Stanley Cup playoffs, on the 4 Nations, all of that. And, as one former Sabres employee put it, like, this is still a really good hockey town, and it's not a really good Sabres town because of the brand right now. And that's something they have to get corrected on and off the ice.
Well, it's a Sabres town here in our chat. I thought it was a very important story that you wrote, so I'm glad that we took some time to talk about it. Again, for listeners or watchers of the show, if you haven't read the story, do yourself the justice of going and reading it at theathletic.com/Sabres. Matthew, probably down. I don't have the TV on. I'm saving my bandwidth just for this show. Okay, well then let's get us out of here. Thanks everyone for hopping in. Enjoy the game today. Sabres prospects at the NCAA tournament will continue after the Sabres game today. 4:00 puck drop between Boston University and Gavin McCarthy. They take on Cornell today, so you can catch yourself some of that, as well as Western Michigan will be facing UMass later around the dinner hour at 6:30, I believe, with Matteo Costantini playing a role there, former junior Sabre. 5th round pick, I think it was, going to be playing there for Western Michigan tonight. So you have plenty of hockey to watch after the Sabres game today. Thank you, everyone, for hopping in. For Matthew Fairburn, you can find his work again at theathletic.com/Sabres. For the production crew who wants to just say, congratulations. I'm Kris Baker.
Congrats.
Enjoy the game. Thanks, everyone, for hopping in. We'll see you again next time.